Everybody, my name is Lauren Medici, and I'm the Director of Engagement Programs at Opera Omaha, and I am delighted to welcome you to our Facebook Live for Opera and Conversation, our virtual Opera and Conversation. Tonight, we are talking about the Opera Omaha's Poetry and Music Project, which is now in its third year, and so we're with some of our project partners that we're working with. We have Matt Mason and Colleen O'Doherty from the Nebraska Writers Collective, and two of our composers for the project, Francis Pollock and Matt Browne, who have been connected with us through the American Opera Project. So we're delighted to have everybody here virtually together to chat about this project. And one of the things that we have been talking about with this project is we have a great opportunity through this work that we do to connect student poets in Nebraska with composers who then take the poems that they've written and turn them into original music. So to get started, Matt and Colleen, I know Nebraska Writers Collective has been involved with this project since it started 3 years ago. So what has been your role with the project, and maybe how's it changed and evolved over those 3 years?
Well, when it started, I was just kind of brought on to kind of help. I think, it really started with the Stranger from Paradise, William Blake opera, where I just, put together some prompts for you and for Opera Omaha and connected students to Opera Omaha. And it kind of changed into this really beautiful thing now where we're getting students submitting poems based on prompts, starting with Proving Up and others for the festival. So, we're connected with students. We work with a lot of schools and poetry, and it's been fantastic to see these students have their poems set to music by these amazing composers.
Great. And Colleen, I know you have also been part of this project for a couple of years now, and you have worked with some of those students as they're writing those poems. One of the things that we've talked about is those prompts are not really, they're not pulled out of thin air, but because you guys work with students year round all of the time writing poetry, you can really speak to what's going to hit home with students, what they might be interested in. So can you talk a little bit about when you see students connecting with those prompts and what might spark for them?
Yeah, we are always trying to come up with prompts that really connect to students, just their life experiences is a lot of it. Especially in those middle school and teen years, they're trying to figure themselves out, figure out their place in the world. And often the prompts will reflect a lot of that, asking them to reflect on identity or sometimes kind of larger questions. And then in addition to the prompts we have with Opera Omaha, often the teaching artists bring in additional prompts that they've been working on that complement the theme. And it's really beautiful and wonderful seeing kids, connect to a prompt anytime, but there's something extra fun that you see them get excited at the idea that whatever they create could possibly be set to music, even if they don't know much about opera or don't have some big background with it. Just the idea is just very new and fun for them. So it's really great seeing them connect with the prompts and create something with this really fun goal in mind.
When you're working with students and talking to them in workshops about writing and thinking about that being set to music, does that change the way you write or change the way you might give suggestions?
For what's great about it being a partnership is, so I am the least musically gifted anything. I mean, it's terrible, just like really no ability here. So I just kind of help with facilitating more of the writing aspect. So having them think about things like metaphors. And I know not this last year, but in previous years, I used Susie Q's metaphor generator with some students to help them along the writing portion of things. As far as them thinking more in terms of musicality or anything like that, if they have questions along those lines, I am always insanely grateful to have an Opera Omaha fellow to defer to, because if they ask me something, I'll just stare at them blankly. So yeah, it's a great collaborative effort with leading the prompts that way. I focus more on the writing and the mechanics of the writing, and they focus more on those musical components.
That's great. So to back up a little bit of all of the parts of the process and kind of what this timeline looks like. So it starts with, in the summer, we come up with prompts, and then in early fall, those are released and go out to teachers across Nebraska and Iowa, as well as the general public, to submit poems. And we invite students in grades K through 12 to submit poems on those themes. And then the workshops that Colleen is talking about are in the fall with our, one of our Holland Community Opera Fellows is paired with a teaching artist from Nebraska Writers Collective, and going into schools and doing writing workshops with students of all ages. And then the submission deadline for projects is in November. Then our composers come in and choose what inspires them and write some original music. Then we do music workshops, and then a performance, which this year is going to be a little different. So we'll talk about that later. But Colleen, going back to working with the fellows to, each year you guys create new workshop models and like a new curriculum and a new plan for those workshops. What are the things that you like to focus on in those workshops, and what does that process look like?
The main thing we end up focusing on in the workshop is just finding as many different ways as possible to help and just stimulate them to write. So I know, and each year it's, I think a testament to the great work you've done with it, and with how the fellows continue to, I think, get more and more training, and they come in, I think, more each year wanting to do better work and be prepared and all these things. Like this last year, I met with the fellow that I was meeting with ahead of time, and we sat and talked about the prompts and how to best deliver them. And so, we gamed out, okay, we want to give a little bit of information about the overall project. So they have this idea of this will be set to music, but that doesn't mean you have to know how to write music. And that, so making sure they had the background knowledge so that they didn't feel, like they're like, oh, I don't know how to write opera, or, we don't want them feeling intimidated. So making sure they feel like the prompts and the project is accessible. And then, trying several different prompts or versions of the prompt. So, some students, they stare at a blank page and it doesn't intimidate them at all, which is amazing. And they can just, start writing. Others, employing kind of those things like sentence starters, as far as, okay, so your first line is this, how do you build from there? So kind of that, as you employ in a classroom, that kind of scaffolding. So different ways you can make the prompt and the writing process accessible to students. So, when I meet with the fellow, we talk about that. And then when we're in the classroom, we use what we talked about. And then also there's always an element, I think, when you're teaching, of just going with the flow and going with what students are telling you they need or are interested in.
Great. And I've attended some of those writing workshops, and the work that they come up with in such a limit, a class time, so 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And what they come up with at the end of those are always just so amazing to hear. So we got in, as part of our submissions, we got 29 poems from 22 students from all across the state. And thinking about those poems as they came in, Colleen or Matt, did you have any things like when you see those submissions, when you see what we're getting in from all these different poets, different students, and in different places, that kind of rang for you?
Yeah, I just love just the creativity and how they take the prompts. I really love where they run with it. Because, I think Opera Omaha and the fellows and Colleen and the other teaching artists do just a great job of, some of these students have never seen an opera. Some of them have never written a poem. And here they are putting together some really interesting, cool work. So that's really, I just love the overall creativity that jumps out right from the poems.
That's awesome. And this is called Opera in Conversation for the point of conversation, not just amongst the people you see here on your screen, but also if you're watching on Facebook and want to type in a question or a comment, we're moderating those as well. So we can take any of your questions that you have, and we'll throw those in. I know we have some of our student poets have joined us on Facebook Live, so I'm excited to see you here. So thinking about once we get all those poems in and we take all the names off them so they become anonymous and are blinded for our composers to select from. Matt and Francis, what does that process look like for you as composers when you look at that batch of poems? What are you looking for? What strikes as inspiration? What does your process look like to figure out what you want to write original music for?
Well, I mean, usually what I do is I just read through everything cold. I never, of course, never know what to expect when I get like a whole batch of poems. So I just try to, anything that jumps out to me, I'll like put a check mark or something next to that one poem. And then usually about half the poems get check marks initially, and I have to continue to whittle it down. But for this particular project, I think the things that I most resonated with were, I'm originally from Colorado, so there's a lot of location-specific poems that felt really at home for me, and I definitely gravitated more towards those poems.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, Colleen, what you were talking about with having a set of poems that so beautifully encapsulate a student's identity. I mean, like that was just so apparent in the set of poems that we received to review. I have a process very similar to Matt. Like, you read them through and you slowly start to like, they're ones that just are speaking to you and you start to hear them musically. What was so fun, because there were two of us, was that Matt and I were actually bartering for a number of the poets that ended up being selected. And so, I texted Matt and I was like, I will give you Cedar County Fair if I can have white trash. I will give. And so we went back and forth.
I have a long history of creating baseball cards, so I knew all that process.
There's some strategy there. Matt's got a strategy, a poem trading strategy.
I think we both got what we wanted.
We totally did. And what we were both looking for was a set of poems that not only were inspiring by themselves, but were also going to work together well as a set. So, something like there was just so much diversity within the selections that each one of us chose.
Yeah, and what was really interesting when I got your selections back was I could see that where students were from and how old they were and all of that. And what was really interesting was there was also a huge mix in diversity of where our students were from. We had 3 who were kind of from the Omaha metro area, and then the other 6 were from outstate Nebraska. So we had a couple poems that really reflected rural qualities of Nebraska, some that reflected like more urban qualities of it, some that really I think are kind of universal in their theme. And then we had a number that came from Beatrice. So it was great to see that diversity that you guys knew nothing about when you were choosing the poems to set to music, but then that came out in that work.
But I think that, sorry, I didn't mean to. I think that just speaks so strongly to the work that is being done before we receive the poems. They were just so beautifully put together. They were just totally magnetic when we received them. So I think the work that had been done to curate these poems, so to help the students get to the place where we received them, was well done. It was very well done.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think it's a hats off to everybody who's working on this project, and Matt and Colleen, and as we've gone through and kind of working with teachers and all of our community groups and contacts to talk about this project and get the word out there so that we get those good submissions in. So we know how Nebraska Writers Collective got involved with this project, but Matt and Francis, I know you're both alumni from American Opera Project's Composers in the Voice program. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what your experience was and how maybe that, working in that project tied into working with this poetry and music project?
Yeah, sure. So Composers in the Voice is a 2-year workshop. The first year for composers is basically just the nuts and bolts of writing for opera. You work with a bunch of singers, you write songs for them, you have sessions on, writing dialogue and structure, and basically just learn all of the things to do in for like 8 hours a day every 2 weeks one day. And then the second year is sort of a professional development thing. You have projects and you try to work on them, and they try to help you connect people. And I believe the second year out of that is what grew. You guys approached the composers and the voice people, and they suggested Francis and I for this project. Yeah, is that how it went down?
Francis went away, but she came back. We're good.
I agree. The composers and the voice is sort of magic because it is this great opportunity to workshop arias and eventually a scene. But we also, I mean, just getting to know other composers and the three librettists that were with us, and then getting to know people like, Stephen Osgood and Mary Bierbaum and all of the fabulous fellows that they had connected that were workshopping our pieces. I mean, it's such an incredible and important project for people who are wanting to dip their toes into writing opera.
And I think it's one of the things that I think is really interesting is that idea of, when you write for the voice and when you have that, it makes such a difference because a big part of this project is what are these words and what are we hearing and making sure that those words get honored in the music.
Well, and that's one of the things that I loved about doing Composers in the Voice was I came to writing for the voice very late, actually. I spent most of my time doing instrumental music in school. So I always was sort of squeamish about trying to write for opera because I never thought, it would be easy to understand the words until I sort of got into how it's written and some of the good examples of it. And then suddenly I found the route into doing it well. And Composers in the Voice is great for that. And then by having that background and then coming to this, looking at these poems, like Francis said, I look at the poems that I chose and I could already hear something musical about them even before I put a note down.
That's great. And Francis, you were actually involved with this project last year in a different capacity when we were, our music partner for last year was Luna Lab. So you were one of our composer mentors for that project. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to kind of be on multiple sides of this project?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so serendipitous. I think that Opera Omaha is connected to two organizations that are so close to my heart. I mean, I've been with Luna Lab in support of them and, part of their team since the first season. I was their administrative assistant, I was the intern. And so when I got the email that saying that, Miss Ellen had recommended me to be a mentor to one of the students, because the students were writing music last year. It was incredible. And I mean, it was a similar process, right? It was instead of being the composer myself, I was sort of guiding a high school senior as they took their first steps in this field. And it was amazing to have them, thinking back to my own compositionally minded senior self, I can't imagine having that experience of having someone look over my music and then to have opera singers sing it, what an incredible opportunity. And then my student went on and is still playing violin and composing in college. So I think that having an experience like the one that she had at Opera Omaha has just spurned her love of the craft and is, she's continuing forward.
I'm really excited to hear that. And I think also the idea that, doing this work and setting these pieces to music and in a way that they can be sung and sung beautifully, it's a lot. And there's a reason that we do this project, because it's really fun. And I think there's an element of discovery for everybody who's involved with it to work as you work through this process. So I'll do another call out that if you have questions or things you want to ask anybody who's in this conversation, pop those in the comments, and we'll take them intermittently throughout the conversation. So we've heard about your overall creative, selection process and the bartering that took place to select those poems. But once you have the poems and you'd settle on the poems, what does your creative process look like to actually set those to music? And Frances, we can start with you and then we'll go to Matt.
Yeah, it's hard to work with a text if it doesn't immediately sing to you. So from those initial selections, it might be like the first line, it might be something that's reoccurring throughout the music, but something is already singing to you. And then from there, it's about, really diving in intentionally and deeply and getting to know the text intimately so that you can start to understand what it wants you to do with it. And, a lot of the times when we were talking to the students in the workshop, I would be like, this is what I was imagining. Like, this is the picture that I had in my head when I'm reading your text, when I'm considering like the musical world that I'm trying to wrap around it. How does that relate to what you were thinking when you were writing this poem? And sometimes it was like, it was like spot on. And sometimes they were thinking something that was like, instead of, I remember with The Silent Land, my student was like, you said that you imagined yourself in a field, but it's not a field, it's a forest. And I was like, fabulous, we can work with it, but it has to be, it's so hard to work with a text that doesn't inspire that. And so from the moment that you pick it, you're looking for things that sing to you, and you go from there. Matt, is that your experience?
Yeah, similar, but sort of completely different in that I grew up just completely obsessed listening to film scores. And I read a poem and then it's sort of a musical world is what sort of crops up. And it's usually something in the piano. So like, for instance, for Happy, I have this sort of repetitive churning ostinato pattern that's sort of undulating and that goes throughout pretty much the entire piece. And that was the first thing that came to me. I wrote that down immediately when I picked that poem. And then coming up with the singing, the melody sort of comes after that. I sort of overlay that on top of the world. And the way I do that is I actually record myself reciting the poem a handful of times and figure out where I'm naturally emphasizing things and where I should be naturally emphasizing things and how that lines up with the metaphors or the arc of the poem. And then it's sort of at that point, it gets sort of boring and systematic.
We have a question from the comments. So Frances and Matt, did you discover something about yourselves as creators through this process?
I one of the funny things about it was when Frances and I started talking about which poems we were going to set, I found out that we both actually had very similar ideas of what we wanted to get out of this project. And then when we got to the workshop and there were so many similarities in the way we composed the pieces, like it's almost like we have pieces that could be paired together in different, genres. It was crazy. And I think if I were to extrapolate from that, I think but both, don't let me speak for you, Frances, but what I find very important in music is a sense of place, in a sense of sort of trying to get this atmosphere to really speak for itself. And like the poem is just sort of an outgrowing from this environment, this community that the people are in. And I get that a lot from your music too, Frances. I'm not sure if that is as important to you.
Yeah, I think you call it place and I call it honesty. Like from the students' poetry, there's no pretension. Like I always felt like the words were sort of, incredibly direct. And for me, I think that I get caught up in pretenses and I get caught up in things that I don't need to be caught up in. And I think I knew this at one point about myself. I guess the question is like, did I learn anything about myself? But this was an opportunity to strip away pretenses and just try and write music that was honest and in service of the students' ideas. So I don't know if I learned that about myself, but it was definitely a refreshing experience.
You've both mentioned the workshop process, and so that's what we did. The first week of March, we had our composers here in Omaha, along with our Holland Community Opera Fellows. Colleen was part of those workshops, and all of our student poets were able to come over those 3 days for a chunk of time to really musically workshop their pieces, the pieces that had been set to music. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience is like? And maybe Colleen, we can start with you and meeting those student poets, and when you're encouraging them to kind of participate and give feedback of that process, what's that like?
It's a really like fun and kind of like a humbling process, just because you have these, I think, even though I work with youth, I think you can still find yourself underestimating the incredible like well of talent that exists in a lot of these kids. And I like how Frances said, a lot of it's very like direct, but very insightful and really kind of what you want out of art. It's speaking to a personal experience. It's also got this very universal quality. And it was really great getting to see them, kind of take in the whole process. And, some of them are very quiet, had a hard time speaking up. Others were really ready and willing to jump in and say, no, I think this, or could we try that? And it was really great to see kind of that progression and see how they got comfortable with the process. And, just all of them getting to see that moment where they're just like watching in awe as their words are coming alive musically, often a genre or a type of music they haven't really listened to. And so you could just kind of see them like light up inside. So it's really a wonderful process and really cool to see them grow that way.
Frances and Matt, as the composers, were there moments in those workshops, and you talked about it a little bit, where it's like, it's not a field, it's a forest, or those type of changes or those insights that you got from those workshops that changed your pieces?
I would say in general, just talking to the students and, sometimes sort of like poking them a little bit, trying to get them to talk about that. Because as you said, they're sort of left in awe of the amazing singers, and like, this is just such a new experience for them. But what I really try to do in situations like this is to like let them know that the whole process is collaborative. The whole process is malleable. So like, it's not just you wrote a poem and now I'm doing my thing with it. It's like, you get to change whatever you want. And a lot of the time it just sort of, when we had some extra minutes, it just became a conversation between me, the poet, and the singer. And basically the singer saying, well, how would you like me to sing this note? Or like, is this the word you want to emphasize in this phrase? And all these things. And like, eventually the students started to like come out of their shells a little bit and say, well, actually, I imagined it this way. And then I think that happened in every single one of my pieces. I don't think there was like any one particular moment that stands out, but like, yeah, that whole collaborative effort was definitely the thing I took away from it.
Yeah, I've two quick anecdotes. The first day we did a piece called White Trash, and I remember inviting the poet to give feedback and to be like, I'm trying to recognize your vision for this, and just being sort of in awe of how this young person was so had such a clear vision and could communicate it so directly. Like, we ended up cutting like vocal lines that he didn't like. And I was just like, I was thrilled by that, because I was like, wow, that's exactly, I think, what the nature of these projects should be, is that like, if you're working with living poets, you should collaborate that way. You know, it was a wonderful experience for me. And the second thing was, I've been thinking about the text so much recently, to Earth She Is, because the text ends with something about the earth is asleep. The earth is asleep, like our earth is dying, but no one listens because the earth is asleep. And it's like, you know, just mere days before we were all sort of thrust into this alternative reality, here was this young person who was recognizing the power and the world that she was about to inherit. And I don't know, I was really like blown away by what the collaborative process was like with these students.
That's great. I think sitting in those workshops every year is one of my favorite times of year, and getting to meet those students and hear their voice, and all of them by the end of their workshop sessions are ready to share as part of that process. And it's really also awesome for our composers to be open and excited and inviting for that, so that they, you know, they are part of that overall collaborative process. And I'm really glad we got to have those workshops in person, you know, the beginning of this month. So all of our poets did get to hear their pieces sung and set to music. So that was really an exciting part of the process. So thinking about those poems and those works, so we can't have our live concert at the end of the month as we originally intended. So we're working on ways to release those tracks digitally and virtually. So we know some of them would be available at the month. Some of them might take a little more time for us to get the tech together to get those released. But are there things when people do hear that music that you want them to listen for or think about, or kind of some of those little Easter eggs of moments?
I mean, I think it goes back to what Francis said, is that you strip away all the pretension of it. Was like, I write a lot of music that's similar to the music that's in these songs, but a lot of the time there's like sort of a hint of irony to it. It's hey, look at this weird thing happening at a concert hall. This time there was not a shred of irony to it at all. It was just fun. Some of these songs were just the most fun thing to write, and I guess just listen and have fun. Try to get some joy out of, you know, what we can give you.
Yeah, I mean, I also think the collaborative aspect, I mean, like these poems, these pieces, these songs were not just composed by Matt and I, like they have, you know, the students' voices literally creating them with us. So, you know, the music, whereas I think we provided the structure, like that workshop provided us the opportunity to transcend what Matt and I can create on our own. So like when you're hearing the music, you're hearing the student's voice.
Great. Thinking Matt and Colleen about the poems. The poems are all going to go online at the end of this month, so that folks can read all of the poems that are submitted to the project, not just these 10 that we could choose to set to music, which is just based on the fact that we can't have a 6-hour concert as part of this project. But are there things in those poems that stuck out to you, or you want to make sure that people are mindful of when they read them?
I would definitely say some of what was so powerful and beautiful about the ones I read and got to hear are how Francis talked a little bit about this with talking about the one about the earth being asleep, is, you know, these are young people that are really taking in and processing the impact of these larger world issues on their personal lives, and doing it in a really like a wonderful way that's not like self-involved. I mean, they're seeing the world and they're talking about their experience in it, but like one of them, one of the poets talked about losing her father because he was a soldier, you know, that's talking about this like larger issue of war and everything, but she does it in this like simple, beautiful, focused way, just talking about her experience of loss. And then, or the white trash piece, just how do we look at someone that doesn't, manage to fit what we think a kid should act like, or, struggles for whatever reason. These are really like insightful, wonderful pieces of art. And I just think people can just look at them as they would, I think when you get into higher levels, as you get more education and all these things, which are wonderful and give you great toolkits, sometimes it's easy to forget that there's something really incredible about just the raw talent that like a young artist brings to the table. I think just kind of remembering that, reflecting on that could be really cool.
So I will do a last call for comments on our Facebook, a last call for questions or things you want me to ask these folks. And I'll ask each of you if there are things that are coming up that that you want to share with us, that we can find out more about you or the work that you're doing. I know it's National Poetry Month, and Matt, I know there's some things out there to celebrate that. So whoever wants to go first can share first of things that you're excited about.
Well, I'll jump in since you mentioned. I was supposed to be in Western Nebraska right now, doing some readings and events. So to kind of make up for that, I was supposed to be in Scottsbluff on Thursday at Western Nebraska Community College. So at the time the reading was supposed to happen, they're going to be sharing a video. So there's a Facebook event for Nebraska State poet Matt Mason, Track Me Down. And I'll be releasing a video at 2:00 Mountain Time on Thursday for that. And then the Writers Collective, we don't have events obviously right now, but we are using Facebook and Twitter to showcase past year's student poems that we work with, and other ways of just showcasing poetry, especially this April.
Great.
I have a project I've been working on with a playwright. It's I can't remember what he calls it, but it's basically a fantasy adventure play for orchestra and theater troupe called Coda's Journey. And it's much like Peter and the Wolf, where it's like about the orchestra and it sort of shows off the orchestral instruments. And we're doing a live reading of that this Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It's has about 24 actors calling in from across the country, and I wrote some little orchestral cues that show off each section. They're computer generated right now because we can't hire an orchestra, obviously. But in it, you'll hear some sort of Mozart-y music, some Dixieland music, and all sorts of stuff that it should be really fun. I hope you could join us. I'll send you the link, and you could put it maybe in the Facebook chat.
Yep,
we'll do that right
send
now.
us the link, and we'll put both of those. We can put them in the comments to this video.
Beautiful.
I wanted to give a shout out. I'm still a student myself. I'm doing my doctorate at Yale University, and we are doing a workshop presentation of the opera that I actually started with American Opera Projects called Salt. It's going up on May 8th via the Yale Opera Studies Today, the YOST conference. Lauren, I'll send you details about this, and hopefully we can get the word out. But it's going to be like a very, scholarly conference. So if you want to come and like talk about like the nitty gritty and like the future of opera, please come join us.
We can all join you virtually. Great. So just a reminder, the last week of April, so the April 27th or so is when we'll get the first batch of those poetry and music videos up on, you'll be able to find them on Opera Omaha's social media channel. We'll share those with all of our project partners, so you'll be able to see some of those. You'll also be able to see a digital copy of all of the poems that are submitted to the project. We'll have those on links on the Facebook, as well as links on the Opera Omaha website, and you'll be able to find out all of the information about where you can see all of that great work. And if you have any other questions or comments or things you want to know about poetry and music, you can add them in the comments to this video. We're taking a look at it. So even if we didn't catch them now, we'll try and make sure that we answer any questions or comments. So before we go, anything that I didn't ask you about that everybody needs to know about this project that we didn't talk about?
Just mainly support the arts and artists. There's a lot of folks at home, and you know, give them a listen, buy a book, buy a cassette or whatever, you know, digital album, whatever it may be, and you know, support Opera Omaha. Check them out on their website and see how you can keep you know, keep getting the arts going.
Awesome. Thanks for that shout out. I think we can all agree that that is a great note to end our conversation with. So I want to give another thank you for all of our Opera and Conversations participants, composers Matt Browne and Francis Pollock, Matt Mason and Colleen from Nebraska Writers Collective, and I'm Lauren Medici with Opera Omaha. And we can't wait to share more of this project with you. And hopefully we'll be able to get together sometime live, and you can all attend the concert and hear all this great music that we're talking about. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you virtually soon.